Thank you, Professor Vyas, for that introduction. Before I start, I must first of all thank Dr. Dhanpatrang Agarwal for this invitation. It's always a pleasure, sir, to come to the, to the discussions that you organize, because he has always been organizing discussions on very, topical subjects. I must also apologize for having come in slightly late because there was another meeting I had to attend, so I was delayed there. Yeah. And the third thing before I start, of course, is I must apologize if some things that I say have already been mentioned before I came in or even after that, because, one of the problems of coming last is that almost everything that you have to say has already been said, so there is very little to be said. Whenever someone asks me about the impact of something that has happened, and very often, this happens, I'm always reminded of Chairman Mao's response to the question of the impact of the French Revolution. He said it's too early to say what the impact is, and I think when we look at Brexit also, you see, one of the things that is quite clear is that it is too early to say what will happen. Clearly, there is a short-term impact, which is what we are seeing happening all the time. Every day you open the papers these days, you hear about the short-term impact of what is happening, but that's very much the short-term impact. The longer-term impact in terms of what Brexit actually means is not known to anybody. I mean, nobody knows what exactly it's going to be. So the uncertainty is the only thing that, we can be certain about. And I think when you look at markets, but when you look at markets, one of the things that markets and investors and others don't like is they don't like uncertainty. But the problem, of course, is that we don't live in a perfect world in that sense. There are political events which change the market forces all the time. So to that extent, what is happening is that because of certain political decisions that were taken, there is an economic impact. Now the question is, now that there has been this vote to leave the European Union, what exactly is going to be the long-term impact as far as both Britain is concerned, as far as EU is concerned, and also for for countries like India. Now, when you look at why Brexit actually happened, everybody is clear that there were certain aspects of the UK's participation in the European Union which was deeply unsettling for many people, especially the older generation. One, of course, was the fact, and I think many speakers referred to it, the loss of identity. Many people felt that you were, essentially being crushed by Brussels. That certainly is one. The second, however much we say that, look, other countries also got, even more immigrants than Britain, immigration is certainly a factor. There is a great, deal of what we call angst against the fact that more and more foreigners are coming in. They're moving into our neighborhood, and that is something that in the long run is bad for the country, because again you are losing your identity. So to the extent that there is this angst, and this angst is reflected in a vote to leave, my own sense is that the whole question of going back, doesn't arise. At some stage, Article 50 will have to be activated. The next British Prime Minister will probably have to do that. So Article 50 will be activated, negotiations will begin, but the question is, what will happen after that, once the negotiations start? And it is when the negotiations start, I think that, there is a lot of uncertainty as far as what might happen. Now, I don't want to bore you with the details of it, but actually I and a colleague of mine have been teaching a course in which we have been looking at this particular part. And generally when we are looking at literature, there are, essentially 8 different scenarios that you can look at. I mean, some might happen, some might not happen, but if you look at the whole gamut of possibilities that might happen, it could be 8 possible kind of outcomes. Now, I won't, sort of go into the details of these 8 because, it'd be perhaps a bit too technical. But essentially, what could happen is that subsequent to the negotiations, Britain gets some kind of a special status within the European Union. One thing is clear, a clean break with the EU, where Britain becomes, an independent country like any other country, is clearly not going to happen. It cannot happen simply because of the fact that over the last 4 decades or so, the relationship, the economic relationship, but not just the economic relationship, the people-to-people relationship between UK and the rest of Europe are just too deep. Economies are very much intertwined. A lot of UK exports go to Europe, and they benefit from the single market, and to the extent that they benefit from the single market is going to be very critical. So coming out of the single market is going to be very traumatic as far as the UK economy is concerned. And my own sense would be that the British government will try everything possible to retain the benefits as far as the single market is concerned. However, the problem is the EU single market is premised on what are called the 4 fundamental freedoms. That is the free movement of labor, capital, goods and services, and goods, services, and free movement of people between different countries. Now, you cannot say that we will allow only goods, services, and capital to move. We will not allow labor to move, because nobody is going to accept that kind of a bargain. And certainly nobody is going to accept a bargain whereby Britain says, okay, we will allow everything, but we won't allow people to come in. But on the other hand, you must allow Britons to go into Europe, without any risk. That also is certainly not going to happen. So the whole question that remains is, what is this special status of the UK going to be? And I think that ultimately will determine what exactly the nature of Brexit will be, and what the impact on both the UK as well as Europe, and to a larger extent the rest of the global economy is concerned. This is very much this is something that is very much uncertain. However, having said that, let me just try to hazard a guess. My own view would be that as you get closer to the details of the negotiations, once the Brexit negotiations start and you get closer and closer to the details, it is going to become clear to any government, whether it is a pro-Brexit government or an anti-Brexit government, it all depends on how the political situation evolves. It is going to become clear to any British government that any significant change in the status quo is going to have a long-term negative impact on the UK economy. So let me go out on a limb and predict that after 2, 3, some are saying 7 years it will take to negotiate. Let me go out on a limb and predict that after 7 years of negotiations, what might happen is that the UK will move partly towards accepting the fact that there has to be an engagement with the EU. And the EU on its part will also move, because remember, this Brexit concerns are not there just in the UK, these concerns are there in other countries as well. The other countries will also recognize that EU itself has to change if you are not to have too many other Brexits. So one of the things that might happen is that you might see a new European Union emerging. So it's not the UK going out, but a new kind of European Union. Now, what kind of European Union will emerge? Again, it is uncertain, but certainly the new European Union that emerges, if at all, that is the way the negotiations go, will be one where there will be some restrictions as far as movement of people are concerned, because migration is an important issue, not just in the UK, but in other countries as well. So it could mean, for example, some kind of a reintroduction of controls as far as migration is concerned. That is certainly one, sort of very strong possibility. The second is that it will also mean more, powers as far as the states are concerned. Because one of the things that Britain has been asking is more control over our own domestic, rules and regulations as far as, different sectors are concerned. My own sense is the EU will also recognize that this centralization that has happened, other speakers have also referred to that, the centralization is actually something that is extremely negative. And so the EU itself might decide that they are going to give a lot more of freedom as far as the individual states are concerned. So my own view would be that Brexit is certainly going to change Britain, but Brexit is also certainly going to change the EU. And my view is that to the extent that the economies are intertwined very closely together, it will be a collective enterprise where both Britain and the EU changes, and there is some kind of an understanding which allows that economic interaction and integration to take place to a certain extent, but with a reduction of the overt centralization that has happened so far. Okay, so that's with regard to the EU itself. One last thing I would like to talk about with regard to the impact on India. Again, there is a shorter term impact. I mean, many argue that there is not much of an impact on India, but again, if you look at the short term impact, it is already there to the extent that the value of the dollar goes up or the value of gold goes up. At least to somebody who's going to go and buy gold and dollar, there is an immediate impact whether you like it or not. So there is a short term impact, certainly, but that is only something that is natural. With regard to the longer term impact, again, the longer term impact can be determined only once one understands what the exact nature of the relationship between the UK and the rest of Europe is concerned. So for example, I mean, there was a mention earlier about 800 companies working in the UK. I mean, for companies who are working in the UK, the fact that they have access to the single market is a big benefit. So to the extent that there are restrictions on access to the single market, if at all there are any, it certainly is bound to affect investment in UK, and it's certainly bound to affect investment by Indian companies as well. So to that extent, there is going to be that kind of an impact. The second is if the single market is going to be disturbed in any manner, and for example, tariffs are going to be once again reintroduced as far as trade between UK and the rest of the continent is concerned, again, there will certainly be an even deeper impact as far as India is concerned. But the bigger impact, I mean, I'll close by talking about the political impact of it. The bigger impact, I think, and this is what many people in business and many people in generally who are looking at economies worldwide are talking about. The deeper impact is, of course, that politics is coming to dominate economics to a larger extent than earlier. So if you remember, after the Cold War, I mean, people talked about the end of history and said, now we are not going to have these kinds of conflicts at all. I mean, the free market has won and so on. There is suddenly, again, a reiteration of the fact, if that was needed, that politics is actually very, very critical. You cannot take politics out of economics. So to the extent that you cannot take politics out of economics, the political situation is always going to have a deep impact as far as the economy is concerned. Now, of course, there are conflicts. Political conflict, I think, is actually good because it reflects healthy debates. To the extent that it's a democratic process, I think we should respect it. Democratic processes are always something that is good. So my own view would be that it's a natural sort of conflict that is happening between two different viewpoints of what the world would be. My hope would be that what emerges at the end of the negotiations would be a new kind of organization where there is a recognition of the fact that there is a politics involved in economics, and that is recognized, and you have a new organization which is perhaps much stronger emerging. It can happen, it may not happen, but I certainly hope something like that emerges, which I think would be beneficial not just for the EU and the UK, but I think would be beneficial for the rest of the world as well. Thank you very much.